an investor relationship is a marriage, right? And you don't want to be having dinner with someone 5 years later and they're just not enthused about what you've built, and all the way along they're not providing you the support you need. You want someone who's going to care.
You're listening to Not My First Guess. I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. And this week's episode, we're diving into early stage investing with Ada Ventures angel, Ash Phillips. Ash is a founder himself, and like a lot of founders, he started his company Dffrnt out of personal need. Having dropped out of university because academia just didn't excite him, he did end up starting his own brand agency. He worked as a real estate agent to bootstrap it and pay his parents some rent when he moved back home, and ultimately ended up growing that agency. But as he did, he realised he wanted and needed more of an entrepreneurial network around him, so started running events and meetups for entrepreneurs. Through a few name and business model iterations based on what his fellow founders told him they needed, this evolved into Dffrnt, a community which aims to give founders the benefits of an accelerator without having to follow a prescriptive program. Having built this community, he had access to a much more diverse network of founders, which put him in the perfect place to pitch himself as a scout or honouring angel for Ada Ventures. They gave him £50,000 to invest, and this podcast dives into what he learned moving from the founder side of the table to the investor side. In this episode, we talk about what Ash looks for in founders he invests in, how to use your pitch narrative to inject passion, practical tips like a handy hack to stand out on the market sizing slide, how to hustle for great advice, and much more. Without further ado, let's get started. So first and foremost, Ash, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's very kind of you to ask.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was that you are, and I know you add some caveats to this, but an angel investor of a very different kind. But Ash is on an angel investment program with a company called Ada Ventures. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you would classify yourself, if not as an angel investor.
Yeah, I think quasi-angel investors best description at the moment, because it's not my money. So, if you're a real angel investor, you're risking your own capital to get some back at some point and hopefully support some people along the way that are building things that you believe in. Fine. I'm still a founder myself. I've got great access to deal flow. People come through the community. Last year, we saw £20 million of active deal flow through the community. The cumulative value of people raising money to build really interesting things. That represents a really great opportunity for me to invest in them. But I'm a founder. I don't have 50 grand every other week to just throw at people and invest. Haven't exited anything yet for any more than 500 quid, which was one of my first businesses. Doesn't really pay too much, but it's a space I've always wanted to get into. And I've got all the things I need aside from the capital. Side of the coin, you've got VC firms who are increasingly competitive. There's more and more VC firms popping up all the time, and they have to come up with more and more ways to differentiate. Gone are the days of just writing a really interesting thesis and hoping someone really rich will back you with it. Like, you could do that, but you need to do a bit more. And so Ada Ventures was set up by Matt Pennycard, Chet Warner, the founder of Diversity VC, which helps to level the imbalances in both the funded and the funder sides of the coin. And I might have butchered the description, but that's the way I describe it to people, and worth checking out. Ada Ventures is built on a thesis of investing in underrepresented, overlooked founders. Matt and Chet are both white, middle-class, Oxbridge-educated people by their own admission. And so they realize their network's only going to take them so far, and underrepresented and overlooked isn't really the sort of people that they end up engaging, actually, naturally, organically. So to explore that and reach people they otherwise wouldn't reach, they created this scout program, akin to other programs that are run as scout programs by the likes of, I think Sequoia's had one for a number of years, and Atomico probably more so in the UK and Europe. And what that does is it enables people with communities like me to start looking through that deal flow a little bit more purposefully and saying, I think Ada would be interested in that. Let me send that to them. And if they invest, I'll get some kind of kickback. And in their case, it's 5% of the deal value in cash, and or you take a percentage of that or all of it as an investment to build your own investment portfolio in that deal itself, up to, I think it's a cap of £5,000. So not bad. I make one intro, someone invests, I get 5k to do what I want with it, invest or go on holiday or whatever. And they get deals from places they otherwise wouldn't see. Seems like fair trade of value capital, so 50k each. suggested to invest across 5 deals each. So we build a small portfolio for ourselves around our own thesis that we think might be an interesting space to invest in, that we might have proprietary knowledge in. And so that was incredible, put the application out. And so now I've got 5, I think it's 6 actually officially, 6 companies I've invested in via Ada Venture. And so that's, it's been really enlightening. It's been incredible to get behind the other side of the curtain from VC, which is what helped me give those views earlier. And amazing to, get on board with an investor hat as well.
So is there anything else about the process, whether that's how startups are reviewed to the common things that actually block deals, that you think it'd be helpful for founders to know? And we're talking angel investing level. So as you said, it's pre-seed levels.
Yeah, if you want to put a stage on it, it'll be pre-seed or seed. Depends on how much of the pie you want, and how much somebody's looking for as well. Because these titles are fairly, flippant. People just use them for work. But there's and I guess anecdotes that people might not think about when they're raising that might be helpful to people. First thing is, a selfish one for me is that I'm a cheerleader for all startups. It's my job to be. It's my vocation to be. Anyone building a company I love, I want to help. How can I help? What can I do? Which is a meme anyway in the VC world, how can I be helpful, et cetera, et cetera. And so really early on, I realized that every single person I spoke to that was raising money, I just wanted to invest in. This isn't practical. I can't do this. If I give out all 50K of my money in the first week, Matt and Jack will look at me and be like, what's happened? Like, it's unlikely, 5 Apples or Amazons within the first week. And so I needed to figure out a way to mitigate against that. The mentoring that Matt and Jack gave was incredible at helping us understand, how to test our biases and get some checks and balances in place. And one of them was, for me, figuring out why this would fail and trying to reconcile that rather than why would this win, which is my default. Why would this fail? What could break here? And being really brutal on it. That was one thing. The second thing was understanding that want to cheerlead for people creates an excitement aspect to everything. And so where I was mentally making a decision as to whether I was going to invest in the first few calls, very quickly realized through talking with the team and the other angels that actually what I should be doing is just matter of fact taking that information in and then parsing it over a couple of days. Not too long because you don't want to leave people hanging for an answer, but at least a couple of days. Ideally a week was where I kind of set my line. And then figuring out if I'm still excited about it like a week later. If I'm still thinking about it, I'm still telling my friends about it, then it's at least a positive indicator for me to go and invest. If I'm not still thinking about it and I'm not still talking about it, and this is where it comes down to founder advice for thinking about, what should you think about with the angels, especially if an angel says no. If I'm not still thinking about it, not still talking about it, it does not mean that it's a bad idea. It just means that I'm not the right person for it. Like if you're building, I don't know, there was one actually, I think it was a childcare app. I mentioned it to friends because they've got kids. I don't. And so I naturally wasn't thinking about it or excited about it a week later. Like I'm excited about the founder, love them, love the idea, love the opportunity, but it's just not something I can help with. And therefore I can't really provide intrinsic value for it. And I won't be a vocal cheerleader for it post investment because I can't say, hey, I'm using this for my kids because I don't have any. So I just wasn't the right investor for that. And I don't want to sound like a whole classic relationship meme of it's not you, it's me. But an investor relationship is a marriage, right? And you don't want to be having dinner with someone 5 years later and they're just not enthused about what you've built. And all the way along, they're not providing you the support you need. You want someone who's going to care. And so that was one key thing. And so if you're a founder going out for people that are going to invest in your business, you want to find people that are values aligned, belief aligned, and excitement aligned. Again, so overarching piece there. They're just on board the whole way. We'll be talking to everyone about it constantly. Because you could take dumb money, which is just, here's a bit of cash, go and build something. And I'll call you in 3 years. If that's what you want, cool. But understand that's what you want. And if you're going out for that, those will be a lot easier to find because, they're just looking at ROI.
And if you're just looking for capital, there are also non-dilutive ways of getting it. There's other options with alternative funding as well. So if they are looking for angel investment, let's hope they're now looking, if they weren't already, for smart money, i.e. people who can bring something. What kind of questions should founders, A, what can they hope for from an angel? And B, are there any kind of questions or checks that you think founders should do more of? as you say, a bit like and the analogy is so overplayed. I don't want to use it, but I do because it's just such a right one. It is like dating and it is like marriage, but it's much faster. And so you need to be really sure of someone with very little information. So you're having to pick up on a lot of signals. So it's really messy and hard. And there's not, unfortunately, probably a checklist you can give, but are there indicators and what should you be hoping for in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Or that metaphor is overused, but it's such an important one because it makes it so normal to understand for most people, unless you're hopeless in relationships, I mean. But like, it's really normal to understand that if you make that parallel comparison, because what you're doing is essentially meeting somebody 3 times. If it was a date, you would be on the third or fourth date saying, cool, should we buy a house together? Like, that's insane. And what you're doing is you're doing that with a business instead of a house. And that's just crazy. So what you want to be doing is you want to be asking the same questions that you would probably ask if that was the norm for relationships. What would you need to get out of the way early on to make sure that you're buying a house with someone who isn't going to drive you crazy, who is going to be good for you, who you will at least be happy being around, right? And that's exactly the same thing with the investor. Someone's going to put money into your business. They have a say in what happens in the business to a certain extent, potentially, depending on the type of shares and the terms and agreements that you have. But they'll still probably send you an email every now and again, whether they've got any say in your business or not. So you got to make sure that that you're happy with them. You want to be making sure there's a chemistry match first and foremost. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right, right? Like, there's lots more science now, I think, going into what the gut biome says to your brain and how it makes you feel. But whenever I've followed my gut, I've usually been right. Whenever I've gone against my gut, I've usually been wrong. And so that tells me something. It's probably confirmation bias in there somewhere, but still, like, it tells me something. So if it feels wrong, probably is. If it feels right, follow it. Fine. Then do some due diligence. Do some really core due diligence. They're going to be doing it on you to make sure that your business isn't crazy. At the early stage, it will be more so relationship-based due diligence because there won't be necessarily customers they can talk to or whatever. But they're going to be doing it on you to find out, are you just a pie in the sky idea person that isn't going to go and build this thing? What's your track record do you have on? What can you bring to the table? What have you brought to the table? Do some on them. Because as I say, that dynamic is far more balanced than the narrative will have you think, right? They're not just giving you money and handing it out to get going and go and build your thing. And, I'm the big I am because I've given you cash. I'm coming in because I think you're going to give me a return on investment. If you are the best thing I've ever seen that's going to give me the best return on investment versus everything else I've seen that month, I should be fighting to get in your company, not the other way around. And so you should be telling me or asking me why I should be part of your company. What can the investor bring to the table is a question you need to ask them. What are your skills and strengths and weaknesses? Like, the sort of thing you would be asking when you're hiring. And where possible, ideally talking to a company they've already invested in, or a client they work with. It's a great indicator, a great temperature gauge. As far as VC funding goes, and I think they're working on it for angels as well, but it's definitely worth checking out landscape.vc, which is run by a guy called Joe, which is basically a trust pilot for investment firms. You can go on there and get a good temperature gauge of whether they're a good firm or not. Yes, there will be nefarious activity and, data on there that might be put on there by people that were just a little bit scorned or whatever. But where there's smoke, there's fire usually. And generally the data is like aggregate across things. So there will always be a 1-star review on TripAdvisor by someone who just wasn't very happy that day, but there might be a bunch of 5 stars and it will average out over time. So those things adding up together, does it feel right? After a couple of meetings, does it still feel right? Chat to people they've already worked with, ask them why they should be on board. That's a good starting point. Everything else is probably paperwork based. And if they're trying to be too, I guess, on their terms, that's the final nail in the coffin, really. You get to set the terms if you want. They get to set the terms if you want them to. But they're going to want a meaningful enough piece of your company to make money back. It's their job, right? They're not philanthropists. They're investors. But if they try and take too much, then they're not factoring in the fact that you need to have the most meaningful part of the company because you need to want to be building it 5 years later, or at least to the point where you're still in it 5 years later. So, if they're trying to take a stupid amount of your company, which I've seen happen before, then that gives you a signal already.
So what level would be stupid at this stage?
It does depend. And I hate that answer because it does depend. If you are building a deep science company and you don't have any scientific background, you need to give away a lot to get this going because it's a nice idea, but you need to hire everyone, like whatever. It's better to have 30% left in a company that goes to $1 billion than 95% of a company that goes to 100K. Fine. And there are graphs on this that will guide you on the right amounts to dilute generally across the board by seeders. I think that's seeders. Seed Legals, I think, have a good blog on dilution. So definitely check that out. Just Google Seed Legals dilution investor. You'll probably come up with the right article. Anything between 10 and 30 probably feels about right. 5 and 30. And I know that's a big array of numbers there and huge amount of difference between the bottom number and the top number, but it depends on valuation. If I can, do pretty much everything, but I just need a bit of cash to get going, then cool, just give me the cash and I'll get going. I'll build the damn thing. But if I need a lot more than that and you represent incredibly smart money to me because you can make one phone call and make the company into, 10x of what it is right now tomorrow, maybe you've got some leverage to argue a bit more with me, but start low and go up. The best tip really is just to tell the investor that you're letting the market decide on the valuation. Have a conversation with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people and see what they say about valuation. And then if you get 3 or 4 people say, well, we'll give you 10, 100 grand valuation at the earliest stage as an anecdotal number. And someone goes, I want 50% of your company, then they're probably playing games with you. And full circle to the first question you asked me, that's what bugs me about Dragon's Den, is their terms are insane. Absolutely insane.
100%. So if you haven't seen Dragon's Den, you might have seen Shark Tank, which is another version of it, which is a bit more international. But the idea is founders come and pitch and there's someone with a table full of money in front of them and they've done impressive stuff and they've all done slightly different impressive stuff. So each business will normally go in with an idea of who they want to invest because of their connections and their expertise. But then they typically ask for huge percentages for little money. And yeah, it's a bit broken. But to a load of your points, good VCs should really want you if you're doing well. And to your point, absolutely ask about them and their fund. So ask questions about where they are in terms of how much capital they have raised, how much they have left to deploy, when their fund closes or when they're raising their next fund, because that might tell you when they need to exit yours. You want to ask to speak to their portfolio companies, absolutely. But ideally, I think a great indicator is when they also try and tell you this in the conversation without you having to ask. When you go in and they're almost pitching to you as well, is a really good signal that they're not wanting to miss this deal. And then you need to have in mind, right, they are selling to the point of relationship building. You're getting the Hinge or the Tinder profile with the best bits, and you want to go and speak to their exes as well. But yeah, if only we could.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a great level of relationship, DD.
I've got an app idea around it. I really think it'd be cool if part of your dating profile was a link to an ex and they referred you. Every breakup I've had, they've been like, you're perfect, but alas, for some unknown reason. So can I have that as a quote? I've taken us off on a tangent. Who knows if this will make the podcast? Yeah. If you're listening, I've clearly had a liberal editing time.
Bloopers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, super helpful. So when you do invest as an angel, what gets you really excited behind a company?
I think the first thing really is the soft stuff, because like from an angel point of view, I'm investing really earlier than most funds will. So I can't do the, how much have you grown this year? How much like percentage points on whether this is low risk versus high risk versus something else. It's not a hedge fund. It's a bet on a person, actually. So what can I really extrapolate from a person that gets me excited? The first thing is, and this is a tip for founders, is the level of confidence somebody has in the thing they're building and conviction, like verbal conviction of what they're doing. And ideally practical conviction, like I want to see you doing stuff as well, not just hear you saying stuff. Whereas certainly in the UK, I see this more so with British-based founders. Different operates with founders all over the world. So I get to see the slight cultural differences between people that are pitching. We're very apologetic as a culture. And so we'll turn up and be like, well, our imposter syndrome is really high. We're kind of building a thing and it's going to maybe do a thing and it's going to do this. And I'm like, you're not selling me. Like, I don't want you to turn up and be really douchey and say, this is going to change the world. Here's what, like, cool, whatever. But if you can say what you're trying to build and say with conviction, I'm already kind of on board. And I practice this myself. Like, I'm very apologetic in my way. Like, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. Like, almost bumped into you in the shop. So sorry, whatever. But I have to put on what I like to call my American hat. And apologies if this is offensive to Americans. But like, when I hear someone who's from the US pitch, very less apologetic. It's much more matter of fact. We're going to go and do this. I don't care if you're on board or not. It's going to happen. That just makes me want to get more on board. And so I put my American hat on when I start pitching about the new direction of the business, because it's far more alluring than, overly humble about it. You need to get the balance between confidence and humility. But if you can get that balance right, then that becomes really interesting to me as an investor, because I can see that someone is going, I'm going to build something big.
No, I just want to pause on that, because actually it's been really interesting. The kind of first 2 episodes we recorded, we really heard this. Devon was really honest about it. His first startup got onto Y Combinator before he realized what Y Combinator was. And then they turned up and they realized it was incredibly prestigious. They were on a cohort with Dropbox, Songkick, these incredible companies. And they were voted like second most likely to succeed. And they failed a few months later, and they failed because they still hadn't actually built anything customers cared about, and still were voted second most likely to succeed. And Devon's quite honest about, like, he thinks some of it was that him and his co-founder Rob were just like, they were really passionate, excited, and they were really good at bringing people along that journey. And then our second co-founder, Sophie, who is incredible at talking about her business. I've listened, she's on a podcast called Pitch Deck as well, where she was pitching when she was raising her last round. So it's not that she's not confident, but she would say she had a real journey to get there with the confidence. And I think I just want to say, not because I don't totally understand, and I do a lot of pitch coaching with founders around helping them to pitch more confidently. And really it's storytelling, and it's helping them understand how to present the best of their business. But I see this, there is this tension. And one of my worries is that I do think at the early stages, confidence in a founder can to an extent be built up. And I think typically you're more likely to be confident if you've always been told that you're going to succeed because you're from an incredibly privileged background. I was incredibly privileged in my background, was always told I was going to succeed, was told from the age of 13 I could go to Oxford and put on a track within my school. That's where I was going to be, and taken to public speaking competitions. And like a huge amount was invested in telling me and reassuring me that my confidence was deserved. It's almost like an entitlement, if I'm really honest about it. And I loved my school, and that's not me trying to shoot them down, but I do think I left with a sense of entitlement about my own worth and my own right to speak and hold space. And I think it sometimes crossed into arrogance, and probably still does. And I don't like that about myself, but I'm trying to be more honest about it. And I think we have this challenge with founders where it's sometimes really hard to disentangle arrogance and confidence. And I do think we have one of the things I'd really like to shift in the space, and I think it will have to happen slowly, is that we start to realize again that maybe that show of confidence that we've been built to expect is a very particular type of confidence, not necessarily indicative of the business's success. But the points that you talked about are indicative of business success, right? Like belief in the idea, excitement about the problem you're solving, commitment to solving it. Those are all things that you can tease out of a founder without expecting them to come into the room and going, I've got this. This is going to change the game.
100%.
And I just really want to reiterate to any founders who are not feeling that confidence, it doesn't mean that your business isn't worthy, that you're not going to be able to raise funding. It's probably something to work on how you present yourself, because it doesn't help. And there are still these preconceptions. And so you probably have to learn how to play the game to get past some of the prejudice. But let's at least be honest in the founder community amongst ourselves that half of the time people come across as super confident. That is not how they're feeling. And I think I just spent the week, and I just posted on this before the show, I just spent the week basically self-promoting. I launched a podcast. I emailed a ton of people basically saying, hey, support me, support this. What I did is really cool. I think your communities would benefit. And Ash, you got one of those emails. Sending those emails was painful. Like I was behind my keyboard like, ew, I feel gross. I feel cringe, because it's so self-promotional, and actually got a lot easier every email I pressed. Again, one of these things is just start doing it, and it gets easier. But I went to an event last night, and a friend went with me who happens to be a coach, and she's incredible. And you said to me, it's an event for founders. You should be telling everyone about your podcast. They need to know. They're going to love it. I loved it. Go and shout about it. And I did it not once with people I met, because it felt, and it's not because I'm not confident in it. Like I'm, I'm speaking to people like you, I'm speaking to incredible founders who I'm incredibly proud to be talking to. So it's not that I'm not really bought into what I'm doing, but sometimes my confidence doesn't manifest in feeling like I want to be the person to lead with, this is the cool thing I'm doing. Long rant short, I just think it's something for us to bear in mind. And particularly any investors listening, I would challenge you not to change your approach, but at least to question how much of the soft signals you're looking for are maybe more typical in white male founders or founders of privileged backgrounds, where we've been told that we have a right to own these spaces, even if we're still a little bit British about it. And I think it's sometimes tricky it's been pointed out to me that it's sometimes a bit arrogant to say like, oh, we're being British when we're talking about being polite and apologetic, because it makes it seem like, oh, we're so much more polite than other nations, which is, it's tricky. And I still fall into that trap of saying it sometimes. But long story short, I think we need to, just be more real about this idea that confidence, you're on a journey to build your confidence. And my best piece of advice for founders on this is find a story that feels authentic to you, that you can tell as a story, and the story excites you, and the story showcases your passion. If you're a founder and you're feeling like you're having to go into pitch meetings and pretend to be something else in order to raise investment, you're not going to raise well. But if you can find a way to tell the story of your business and focus on what you're doing that is awesome. Don't be over apologetic, because others won't be doing that. That's also true. You are playing against everyone who is going in arrogant, but find something that feels true to you as a way to do it, I think makes it a lot easier.
So well said. Like, mic drop moment there. I think that's just ideal. Yeah, you're right. It's easy to take certain things when you've been doing them for so long, or you've been teaching them or hearing them for so long. So yeah, it's good to be called out on those things, for sure. I guess, one of the things that I would like to see in lieu of confidence, or like overly overt confidence, is at least a little bit of even introverted hunger. Like someone can make that, because I don't know necessarily, I say this from a place of accidental privilege, I guess, but like, I don't know whether necessarily I've been given all that confidence, but the people that I see, at least socioeconomically, from the places that I'm from, there's in lieu of the confidence, or at least the arrogance of like, this is my space, I'm going to own it anyway. It's like, this isn't my space, but I want it. And so, the ability to go and own that in whatever form, whether that's, a humility-based kind of presentation about how, this really does need to exist, and it's quite, quiet, but makes you lean in, versus someone coming into the room and going, this has to happen now, because of this. Like, both of those are powerful in their own way. That's why, at least from like the confidence piece, that's why when we run our own events, I always like to go and speak to the people who are pretending to send emails on their phone, because they've often got the most interesting stories, even though they're the most quiet. So yeah, I really appreciate you saying that and bringing it up, for sure. It's something that I totally agree with. But then I guess the other thing to throw in there and round out the question about like what is helpful to see as an investor, it is the verbal or the presentation or whatever it might be, but it's also surprising us with traction as well, whatever traction might look like. But if you can paint a really big picture, so big that I start to doubt it, like the bigger you go, the more my eyebrow raises. And then you go, and here we've done all of this stuff already. I'm like, oh, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast. Like, I was going to say the S word, but yeah, that, like, you've done some stuff. And then they're like, okay. And then the market is like 100 billion, and like, we're going to make this in these few years. And I'm like, okay, fine. Like, my eyebrow starts to raise again. They're like, oh, we made 100 grand this year, and we did it with no budget. Like, it starts to take me on a journey where it's defeating all of my reasons to say no along the way. And you can say that confident, passively, you can say it in any way. But by the end, I'm like, I don't know why I can't not. If I'm still excited about it and you've ticked all those boxes, by default, it kind of has to be a yes. Yeah. If you've ticked all those boxes and I'm still not the right person for you, then I'm still not the right person for you. But like, fair play. That's insane. I'll probably introduce you to 4 more people that are the right person for you. Yeah, you want to make sure, ideally, the realistic version of the business is already great. The optimistic version of the business is amazing. And the pessimistic version of the business still works. Like, that's the ideal scenario. Not, no one wants to invest in pessimistic, but if pessimistic still works and it returns my capital, then like, that's mitigated risk and the opportunity remains and it's massive, then let's go. But yeah, 50 to 100 million is obviously a really big jump. But if you can even do some maths to show me how that extrapolates, and that starts to at least make it more realistic. It's like, oh, we've sold one a day for the last 50 days. Fine. Okay. That tells me you need 100 million days to sell 100 million. Okay. But actually, we've sold 50 over the last 3 days, which means we're doing, 15, 16, 17 a day. If we do that for the next 10 years, then we'll get to that number. And actually, if we add a 10% month on month growth to that, powered by the money you're hopefully going to give me, because we haven't tried any other marketing channels yet, our cost of acquisition goes down, blah, 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 all that stuff. And they can start to do that maths. And I'm like, I can see how this plugs together now. That makes sense. And it answers the questions before I ask them. So those things added together just become quite a potent mix. Pitch it confidently, ideally, with hunger, but at least believably, and with attraction and proof behind something.
Yeah.
And who knows, in building said traction, you might accidentally build a business that makes enough money not to need the investor in the first place, which stops you having the conversation or makes that conversation even easier, because you can walk into the room and go, I don't need your money.
Yeah.
But if you want to be in, then it gives you great opportunity to build the best term for yourself.
Yeah. Real leverage. Yeah. So interesting. And I think the other thing that founders sometimes feel like they can't do, so love your take on this, is to talk about the assumptions they're making. And so I think where this is done really well for me is when founders, so let's take market sizing as an example, because it is all assumption. Your market size is a guess, right? You're guessing how big it's going to be in 10 years, ultimately. So I've seen founders do it really well, where they go in and go, this is the market size, this is how many customers, this is how much we think we can charge per customer. And so this is what we think we can take home in a year with this penetration rate. And sometimes that penetration rate will be high, and you're in your head going, I don't believe that. So when they then follow up with even if we only took, so you can see they've got the ambition to take a big number, but you can also see that they've done the pragmatic thing of going, okay, even if we only took 1% of the market, which is what I suggest all founders check your market size against. If you only take 1% of the market, have you still got a big business? If you're raising venture capital. And if you're not raising venture capital, if you only take 1% of the market, it's probably less realistic that you're going to take 1% of the market without venture capital. So sense check a different way, but still check whether you're excited about the opportunity of how much you could make per year. But yeah, I love that assumption-led pitch where you're open about the assumptions you're making, but show me what they're informed by. So I'm like, oh, I buy into the logic, and I buy that you've really thought about this, and it's not just you taking away responsibility for those assumptions. Oh, it's all a guess. So what? I think is so powerful.
Yeah. When I see the market size slide, like, I brace myself most of the time, because a lot of people just follow the standard process, right? They download the YC pitch deck template and they fill it in. They go and, do their TAM, SAM, SOM, which for people listening is total addressable market, serviceable addressable market, and serviceable obtainable market. And that's your 1% that you're talking about. But when the 1% comes up, it irks me. Like, I get it, but their answer is really important for me to the question, because it feels lazy. It feels like, oh, it's 100 billion, take 1%, we're a billion. A bit light. If you call it out for what it is and you say this is just an assumption, then cool, okay, that helps. But actually, here's a hack for most people, and please back this up. Don't just do it and then say Ash told me, because it will really ruin any integrity I have. Don't do 2.4%. Do something that is more reasonable, more thought out ideally, but makes me want to know why. Because I will ask that question if it says 2.4%. I want to know, why is it 2.4 and not 1? Why is it 2.4 and not 5? Like, why have you said that? And if you can back that up, because that's the important thing, don't just do it flippantly and then not have a reason. But if you can back it up and say, here's why, because there are 3 competitors in the marketplace right now. The top 2 make X because they are top 2 options on Google. The third one down would arguably make this by diminishing numbers. Therefore, all of those added together assumption, educated guessing. Then I start to go, this is really interesting, because they're really understanding that space. Often these are things that we're investing in where hopefully we understand the space, but sometimes we just don't. There are nuances in these spaces. And so I'm here to be educated on this. I don't need to know, because if I knew everything about every one of the businesses that I was investing in, I'd be building them all myself and making more money instead. and I don't have the time, obviously, I don't have the capacity, and I'm not the right person for you.
Yeah.
You are. That's why you're building this and I'm not. So if there is a 1% opportunity, then fine, but just tell me how you've identified that. And if you just turn around and go, well, because like, just that's what people put, don't need to hear it. But if you say, I've been working in this space for 10 years, I understand it more deeply than anybody else understands it, whether you say that confidently or shyly or whatever, anywhere in between. If you've got the chops to back up why you think this marketplace is broken, you're about to go and take a percentage of it, then great. All of this adds into a mix that is equaling either a yes or a no.
Yeah. This point applies to so much, right? Whether you're talking about assumed conversion rates and you're assuming, oh, we're going to assume the conversion rate based on the friends and family marketing we've done so far. That is not going to be indicative. I want to know you've gone and looked at the market and seen how it's going to change over time. And if you're doing a business and you're pitching to me a direct consumer business in the pandemic, I want to know that you've also looked at how the pandemic is affecting the customer acquisition costs, because actually it's become cheaper to advertise online because big advertisers weren't doing it during the pandemic. So again, it's this piece of not desk-based research for the sake of it, but I want to see that your mind is really inquisitive and trying to understand the aspects of the business that are going to kill it, or the key metrics that are going to mean this is a success or a failure. And if you're trying to raise capital from me as an institutional investor, that you've thought about the key metrics that are going to make this investable or not for me, which might be different to what's going to make it a success as a business, actually what's going to make it investable.
100%.
Okay, so
good.
quick fire questions. What is the most common piece of advice you give startups?
I read these and I did have answers for them. And they're supposed to be quick fire, aren't they? So I'm supposed to be able to answer these really, really quickly. Most common piece of advice I have for startups is sell something. Just sell something. If you haven't sold something, ideally for more than it costs to make it or sell it, then you don't even know if you've got a business yet. Like, anything that you do without money converting from a customer to you is a research project. It's not a business yet. So go and sell something, because you might surprise yourself. And if you sell one thing, you're like, whoa, that was easy. And then you do it 1,000 more times and you go, oh, this, like, I'm rich. Like, but until you do that, you don't know. And so many businesses are built on funding based on the fact that we'll figure out how we sell stuff later on. I'm like, if you don't test that, you might be dead in the water. And I've seen it, because I've been in it 10 years now-ish, multiple times where that just plays out. And you don't like to see it because it means that people get made redundant.
Mm-hmm.
But if they just sold something to somebody at some point, Clubhouse, great example, right? $1 billion valuation, never really sold anything to anybody. We'll figure it out. There's loads of people on the platform. It's dead. Like, why didn't you sell something first? Crazy to me. Go and sell something.
And what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Probably the same thing, to be honest. Probably everything I spout out is just borrowed from other people.
I just want to pause on this, because Devon said the exact same thing. Everything I've said today is basically borrowed. I would say the exact same thing. My opinions are incredibly recycled.
Nothing's new.
But it's actually quite good advice to founders, right? Just, again, don't feel like you need to come up with something that totally reinvents the wheel when there's already great stuff out there that can serve a new purpose.
Absolutely. I might hack this and say that that's the best advice I've ever been given. And then there we go. It's just really easy.
Nice.
I don't know. I've just been given so much great advice over time that it's hard to pick any one thing. I think the important piece. So here's a cheeky answer to the question without giving one formal answer to the question. I've been lucky enough to hustle my way into getting advice from some really awesome people. Every single person has a great opinion. They all have great advice and they're all right. But at the end of the day, it's still your decision to make as to which direction you go in. There was a point in time where I wanted to take the business in a direction of monetizing it. And everybody had a different idea. Someone said, close it. It won't make enough money. Go and build your agency instead. Someone said, you should charge this. You should charge that. Bigger money. All of that. Everyone's right, really. But at the end of the day, it's my decision. So I guess it's kind of like an awkward way of answering this question. But all the advice you're ever given will be interesting, but it will be like important to that person who took it in and is recycling it back to you. Like, no one's ever built the thing you're building at the time you're building it and been you building it. So something's going to change. And so take that advice and then do with it what you will. And I'm sure someone probably told me that at some point. So that'll be my answer.
Love it. How did you hustle for your advisors? New question, not on the list.
That's another rapid one. It's the short answer here is understanding social currency. And what I mean by that is understanding what do people want and what do I want and where do the two meet and how do I make it a win for everybody in that equation. Often people are powered by money, fine, because they run a business, impact and narcissism, probably, oversimplification in people's motivations, but three things probably. And so if you're sliding into the DMs or the emails or LinkedIn messaging somebody and you want their time, you need to figure out what trigger you can pull to get them to say yes to giving you some time. And it might be disarming them with naivety. Hey, I'm just starting, like, I would love some help. Great. Like some people have like a nurturing side to them and they really do want to help. So that'll trigger them. If you want to get their attention and they're motivated by their own personality, arguably good or bad, but there might be some narcissistic trait in there somewhere. Tell them what they're great at. Tell them why they're awesome. And like, it's hard not to say thanks at least to that. And already you're in a conversation. And tell them what they can bring to the table.
Yeah.
What are you missing that they'll fill a gap for? Do all of those things and buy them a coffee. And it's really hard to say no if somebody wants to buy you lunch, right? And, it doesn't have to be lunch or coffee for people that are, cash strapped. It can just be some time. You can pay it back eventually, but pay it back to them for the advice they give you and it'll pay dividends over time. But just reach out to them. That's the first thing that people forget. They're just so focused on how do I get someone to say yes. They don't even ask the question in the first place.
And I think a really good way to do this as well is you can come at it from two ways. So you can either do this before you reach out, which is the better idea, but I always forget to do it. Just if you're reaching out to them on a social media platform, like engage with their content first. Comment on stuff and be deliberate in how you comment. Tell them what you learned. Tell them your takeaway. Tell them what questions you still have. Tell them another resource that you found that was interesting and linked. Because if they're narcissistic or just trying to share something, it really helps their engagement metrics. So you're doing a little thing for them and it'll just make them feel a little bit more generous to you. But B, it shows them a little bit of the value of interacting with you without having to interact with you so that they can start to see, okay, they're smart, they're switched on, they're going to take my advice, they're already taking my advice, I can actually make a difference here. So number one, do that before you speak to them. Number two, sometimes you'll forget to do that before you speak to them. You get excited, you just send them a message. Don't take no response as an answer, then go and do the keep engaging with keep commenting, keep showing the value and check back in after a month and be like, hey, I just wanted to check this wasn't missed. No stress if it was, but would still love to chat. And the amount of times, some people will just ghost you and that's fine. And you need to be ready for the rejection before you do it. But sometimes the follow-up message works a treat. And that's also you developing a good sales skill by getting those advisors, and it's such a powerful thing.
And just send them a crying emoji because that really helps. That's a joke, by the way. Please no one do that.
I sometimes send a ghost emoji. No, don't do that either. Don't overdo it. But just, a checkpoint that's not passive aggressively phrased can help. Are there any other myths about entrepreneurship you'd like to dismantle?
God, yeah, there's so many, but which do you pick? The aggressive narrative on that it's incredibly easy or it's incredibly hard. It can be somewhere in the middle too. It's the people that do this whole hustle porn, you need to be up at 5 a.m, yoga, meditation, do your journaling up until 2 a.m, go back to sleep. Old school Gary Vee, which has definitely changed with new school Gary Vee because he realizes how much of a toxic, society he was building with that narrative. That's one way of doing it if it works for you. There's also the 4-day work week. I'm not really going to do much. I'm still going to build a great business. That works too. Guess what? 9 to 5, sat at your desk in your apartment, building, slowly but surely also works. There are so many different ways to attack it. There is no one way. Don't get disillusioned by anyone telling you there is. Whatever works for you works. Simple.
100. And I, just to reinforce, first guest on the podcast, Devon, burnt out, now works a 4-day week, thinks he's more productive and does better work than he ever did. Founder of Mama Made talks about how in the early days, it was actually super stop-start. You should have spurts of working on it and then not work on it really at all. So again, there's not one method for the success. I love that. That's a great myth. Okay. Final question then in that case. What do you do to look after your mental health as a founder?
What do I do to look after my mental health as a founder? I think this is one thing that I like to advocate for a lot, which is Purposeful work and purposeful play is the way that I kind of look at life now. I've never sent a great email whilst watching Netflix, and I've never paid attention to a film whilst working. Like people that try and do both at the same time, like they got The Office on that screen, which is keeping them entertained while they're trying to do work. I get it. It's cool because it's making something that's less bored, but do the work in half the time and go and watch The Office and enjoy it, right? Like rather than try and do both and work until 11 p.m. at night. So for me personally, what that takes the form of is taking time off. Like my work is so social. I talk to people all day, every day, like I'm sure you do. We're really similar in the way that we interact and we do our jobs. So I drain my social batteries throughout the day as a result. And so at the end of the day, I need time. And that manifests in running. People say, hey, we should run together. No, I don't want to. Like, I want to run on my own. It's catharsis for me. I'd like to say I read. I'm a terrible reader. I think it's powered by ADHD, but I grew up a gamer and I still am. And I'm a massive advocate for gaming as a distraction, not a distraction, but a escape from work, because it's so immersive. Means that you don't necessarily think about anything else. It's like going climbing. Like you're so focused on not falling off the wall, you can't really think about anything else. I'm so focused on not dying on this game or whatever it might be, that I'm not thinking about the email I have to send later. And if I am thinking about the email I have to send, I'll put the game down and focus on the email. Like doing both at the same time is futile. So I take time off and look after myself.
Love that, Ash. Thank you as ever for going every which way. This has been incredible. It's been cathartic. I've learned a load. I think there are some really important messages in here. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing so openly, and looking forward to speaking soon.
Thank you so much for having me. And really enjoyed it. Look forward to hearing more of these podcasts.
Whoop, whoop. Enjoyed this episode? Let me know what you want to hear next. Are there particular business models you're interested in? Particular angels of founder life you'd like us to explore more? Drop us a note through our LinkedIn page, Not My First Guest Podcast, or at Not My First Guest on Instagram. And for those of you curious what I get up to when not interviewing founders for this show, I have a new startup, If We Raise, aiming to get expertise and capital to underrepresented founders earlier. You can follow what my co-founder Tim and I are up to via at If We Raise Together on Instagram, or at If We Raise on LinkedIn and Twitter. We'll be sharing our lessons learned along the way, as well as highlighting the incredible founders and angel investors joining the If We Raise journey.